Hello people, this is Dr. Wang here recording. I hope this video clip finds you guys very well and healthy and safe. So today we are going to continue on our topic of transaction exposure. The definition of transaction exposure is how to control for the sensitivity of your realized dollar values of the contract transactions in the exposure of foreign currencies. So basically, when you do export and import, you sell and buy things. The deals are done with a credit, not in cash. So you will have to deal with accounts receivables and accounts payables, pay in the near future, and the exchange rate in the near future will be a concern to you because it may change unfavorably, and that poses a risk. So last time we were talking about how to use forward, futures, currency swaps, and also options to deal with that. Today we are going to finish off the rest of these techniques. We also have the choice of invoice currency, Lac strategy, exposure netting, and also short-term loans. Short-term loans is a little bit different from the derivatives we learned before. It is more like using, well, definitely short loans in the financial markets without any underlying assets. So it's a financial product, but it's different than derivatives. Okay, so let me skip these things we covered before, and let's put right here. All right, so hedging through invoice currency. It's an operational technique because you don't have to buy a financial product or sign a financial contract for it. So basically, the exporters invoice the bill or part of the bill in local currency instead of foreign currency. Okay, so if you sell things to foreigners, you want them to pay you in U.S. dollars, right? You can basically just make a part of the bill or all of the bill in the denomination of U.S. dollars, and then it is true. It is true. When you are dealing with trade partners in developing countries, well, this could also include Russia, because their economy is not as strong as the United States, and with very much instability there. So their currency usually melt against U.S. dollars. So they are so willing to accept U.S. dollar as the transaction currency. If you go surfing on a beach on the Phuket Island in Thailand, then they like you to pay in US dollar cash instead of a Thai baht. So if you are doing business with those developing countries, definitely a dollar payment would be more than welcome to them. So that is good for you because you have the well, you don't have to go through the exchange, and you know what your dollar figure, and that's for sure. All right, but if you're dealing with partners from developed countries like Japan, Switzerland, the Euro countries, and also UK, then you have to deal with Japanese yen and Swiss franc, British pound, and euros, and so on. And then you will need to use your negotiation power, try to invoice the currency into US dollar instead of their own currencies. Let them deal with the exchange risk. Okay, well, it really depending on who has more negotiation power, who has the monopoly power of the market. So, but you should know that no matter you pay dollars or receiving dollars, you don't have to deal with the foreign exchange risk. So that's the whole point of it. Okay. So the second methodology here is called lead and lag strategy. So lead means paying early or collect early, and lag means pay or collect late. All right, so you have to make sure you know the pair of the words. Lead means early, lag means late. So let's see if you have a, a 10 million euro receivables and the current spot rate is 1.5, the future spot rate is 1.6. If you do nothing, if you do nothing, then you will, what exchange rate would be good for you? Well, let's see. I'm talking about it. You do nothing. You did not buy options. You did not sign future contract. So which rate would be good for you? So if you have those receivables, if you can choose to collect early or collect late, do you want to do it now or do you want to do it later? If you do it now, you would go with the $1.5 per euro, the spot rate now. If you do it later, you would go with 1.6. So if you collect the receivable today, you would get 15 million dollars. That's 1.5 times 10 million euro. If you collect in the future, then you would get a 60 million. So you prefer to collect late. And if you have the chance to delay the collection, then do it. Because for the same 10 million euros, you'll be worth more dollars in the future. Okay, so if you collect in the future, it's called a Lac strategy. Well, if you expect euro is to appreciate, then you better implement the lead strategy for euro payables and the lag strategy for euro receivables. And if you expect the euro to depreciate, then you better do the lead strategy for euro receivables and a lag strategy for euro payables. Okay, so this is something you need to understand, and perhaps if you can remember it, that would be very useful for you. So what you have here is if euro is going to appreciate for the same amount of euros, if you wait until it appreciates, you would need to pay more euros, then that's bad for you. So you would rather not wait that long. You want to pay your bill before euro appreciate, before you pay more dollars for the same euro. So you would need a lead strategy here. And if you have a euro receivables, then you would want to wait until euro appreciate, until each euro is worth more US dollars, so you can collect more dollars. So you would need a lag strategy. If you think euro is going to depreciate, and for the same euros, when it depreciate, you would get less dollars. So you would rather implement a lead strategy. You collect your bill before euro depreciate, before you get less dollars for the same amount of euros in your receivables. And you would take the lag strategy for euro payables. You want to pay later. You want to pay when euro depreciates. So for the same euro bills you pay, you would need to pay less US dollars. So that's good for you. So you would need a lag strategy for euro payables. All right, here's another strategy. It's called exposure netting. So if you have account payables and account receivables in the same currency, you just establish a natural hedge. You just make the payables and receivable cancel each other. So that basically means the multinational firms should not consider the deals in isolation once the residual exposure is determined. So if accounts receivable is in excess of accounts payable, so you just need to hedge the actual, okay, instead of hedging both account receivable and account payable separately. Well, you see, it's very easy to understand. It should also very easy to do. However, some multinational firms still make that mistake. One example was Lufthansa, a German airline company. They have an American business, and they also buy aircraft from a Boeing company. So they pay Boeing US dollars, and also if they fly American passengers to Europe, then they also receive US dollars as a payment. Well, you know, it's a German company. At that time, their currency was the Deutsche Mark. But they did not quite cancel the dollar receivables and dollar payables at that time. Rather, they hedge separately for the receivable and payables, which incur a lot of cost for such hedging. If the company let the dollar payments and the dollar collection cancel each other, then they would have a much less uh, dollar risk to deal with as a German company, of course. All right, and here is another methodology. It's called a contingent exposure. Let's say if a company is bidding for a foreign project, there could only be two outcomes. Either the foreign project accepted or it get rejected. Well, if the foreign project got accepted, then you would be in need of a lot of their currency, okay, because you will have to establish factories and buy all the equipments and establish the production lines there. Okay, if it got rejected, then you just do nothing. Well, the exposure to the exchange risk is contingent on whether the bid is accepted or not. So, should you commit yourself to such a big exchange, given that the project may or may not be accepted? Probably not. Probably not, because you don't want to expose yourself to that risk um, when you actually convert the currency, but the project got rejected. You have nowhere to use for that currency except to convert it back. So at this time, the best tool for you is a option. Okay, is an option. So if you have a possibility of launching a foreign project, then you would have the right to you want to have the right, not the obligation, to buy those foreign currencies. So at this time, a call option would be your best friend. A call option give you a right to buy certain foreign currencies at a predetermined fixed strike price. And if the project is not accepted, if it is rejected, and you don't need the currency, then you just don't need to do the conversion. So you will just let the option expire. So that's how we deal with such a contingent exposure. Okay, and once again, we don't know whether the project is accepted now. We only know whether it will be accepted like 6 months from now. All right, but what will be the exchange rate 6 months from now? That's the risk we're dealing with. All right, our next topic here is money market hedging. So, money market is about using short-term loans to hedge the risk of foreign exchange. So, it's also about dealing with accounts receivables and accounts payable denominated in foreign currency. So, how could a money market, how could short-term loans help you avoid the risk? Well, basically, if you sign a short-term loan in a foreign currency, then you definitely know how much your future cash flow would be, no matter in foreign currency or in US dollars. So it provides certainty, and you only need to do the exchange right now. Um, and there's no risk because you know the exchange rate now for sure is available in the spot market, but you don't know the exchange rate 6 months later or a year later. So that's the risk you want to avoid. And short-term loans basically will let you know how much your dollar revenue or dollar cost would be when those receivables and payables are due. So here are some keywords I marked in red. In your test, you can basically remember these pairs of keywords. So how do we conduct the money market hedging? We borrow in foreign currency to hedge the receivables denominated in or invoiced in foreign currency. Okay, we borrow in foreign currency. Okay, definitely borrow from the local bank in the other country, not in the United States. And if you are dealing with payables, you will need to lend in foreign currency, okay, to hedge that risk. So the whole idea here is when the receivable is due, you're gonna use it to pay back the loan with interest. Well, what loan are you paying back? You're paying back the loan you borrowed at the first place in foreign currency, and you're gonna pay the principal plus interest of that loan. Okay, and for the foreign currency payables, when the loan matures, well, that's the time you need to pay in foreign currency. Then you will just use the loan you lended today, which is due later. So you use both the principal of the interest to pay for the bill in foreign currency, of course. And the loans and the bills have the same maturity and are in the same currency. That's a pre-requirement. All right, so here is one example I want you guys to go over. And this would be a very hard question in your second exam. I think this is one of the hardest. So how does a Boeing company hedge this exchange risk? Let's say Boeing company just did some export to UK and have this 10 million pounds. It should be accounts receivable because this is a invoice Boeing billed the British company. Okay, so based on all of this numbers, so what should the Boeing company do? So you have the spot rate here, you have the forward rate as 1.46. Well, in the money market hedging, you don't deal with the forward, so that's not necessary. You just play with the interest rate in the United States and in UK. And also you will need to do the exchange right now as opposed to do it in the future. If you do it in the future, since you don't know the exchange rate in the future, then today you are facing uncertainty of the exchange rate in the future. That's a risk you want to avoid. So how exactly do you do that? So today you need to borrow pounds. Okay, today you need to borrow pounds. So when the receivables are due, you just use that receivable to return to the loan, to the pound loan you borrowed today. Okay, then you need to figure out how much pounds do you need to borrow today. Well, imagine that a year later you will receive 10 million pounds from British Airways. That's your accounts receivable turned into cash, get collected. So that's a 10 million pounds, and this 10 million pounds, serve as the principal and the interest of the pound you borrow today. So the 10 million pounds is the future value of the amount of pounds you borrow today. Okay, you are going to use 9%, which is the UK interest rate. Remember, it's the interest of the country with that currency. Okay, so that would give you roughly 9.1 million British pound. So that's how much you need to borrow today. Well, the question is, if you want to borrow if you want to borrow 9.1 pounds today, then what are you gonna use with that? Okay, are you gonna put it in somewhere in your pillow or in the suitcase and hide it somewhere? Well, no, you're not gonna do that. If you borrow those pounds, you can just convert it into US dollars, okay, and then deposit those dollars into a US institution and US interest rate, and then when a year later, then you would have some dollar principal plus interest. Okay, so here it comes to the question: what is Boeing going to do with the 9.1 million British pound they just borrowed? Okay, they gotta convert to US dollar today and earn US interest for a year. Okay, why do they need to hold it for a year? Because that's when the accounts receivable are due. So the account receivable is 10 million pounds, and that's due in 1 year. If the Boeing company, does not do any hedging, then a year later, it will need to convert 10 million pounds to US dollars. So we're talking about a pound inflow a year later, and then it got converted to US dollar. Okay, so to make it a suitable comparison, we should know how much our dollar would be if we do it with money market hedging or do no hedge at all. If you don't do hedge at all, then you are doing the conversion in the spot market a year later, which is exposed to a lot of risk. But if you do the money market hedging, then you will get the dollar. You will need to know how much your dollar would be a year later, so you can make the comparison. Okay, so if that 9.1 million pounds converted to US dollars, you would go with the spot rate, which is $1.5 per pound, and that gives 13.7 million US dollars. Okay, but again, this is not a cash business. We don't put those dollars in a suitcase or on a bed or in a pillow. Instead, we're gonna invest the dollar and earn US interest. So a year later, the dollar principal and interest will reach to 14.6 million US dollars. So that's how much we receive from selling a aircraft to the British Airways. So a year later, our cash flow in dollars will be 14.6 million US dollar. Okay, and is this 14.6 come for sure? Yes, it does, because we know this come from the dollar principal and the US rate, which we know for sure today. How do we know this dollar principal for sure? Because it comes from the amount of pounds we borrow today and this 1.5 spot rate, we know for sure. Okay, and how do we know that we have this 1.9 million pounds? Because we know it is from the 10 million pounds the 10 million pounds we're gonna receive, and also this 9% UK interest rate we are dealing with today. So 10 million pounds is something we will receive for sure, and the 9% British rate is readily available without any uncertainty. That's what I'm saying. So everything here is fixed. So based on US interest rate and the 10 million payables in British pound, and also US interest and UK interest, we can find this $14.6 million without any risk. Okay, so we know how much 10 million pounds a year later would be converted to. It's going to be 14.6 million US dollars without any risk at all. Okay, so our purpose has been served. We know for sure how 10 million pounds could be converted into a specific predetermined number of US dollars. So that's the whole purpose of hedging. Okay. So this is the table of different cash flows occurring at a different time. So here are the steps we need to do. So today we are borrowing pounds from a British institution. So 9.1 million pounds borrowed, and a year later, we will need to pay 10 million pounds. Okay, so since we borrowed this 9.1 million pounds, and we're going to convert to US dollars, so this 9.1 is gone, so we deduct that, and then we have this 13.7 million US dollars on our book. And then we're investing this $13.7 million to a US institution. Okay, we put it in as a short-term loan here. So the $13.7 million is gone, and is going to the bank. So today our cash flow is zero. So after we transact all of this cash, we borrow a loan from the UK, then we convert to US dollars, and then we invest it in US dollar in a US bank. and on our hands we have 0 cash. But we know that a year later, this 13.7 deposit will change to 14.6 million US dollars. Okay, and then a year later, we will receive 10 million pounds for our receivables. But that 10 million pounds will not be converted at all. It will just be used to pay back the loan we borrowed a year earlier. Okay, then our cash flows in pounds will be cancelled out. So we receive pounds from British Airways, then we use that pounds to pay the the pound loan we borrowed a year earlier. So there's a 0 cash flow in pounds. But we do receive a 14.6 million from a US investment. So that's our cash flow a year later. Okay, here's a case we're dealing with payables in foreign currencies. Once again, if you're doing money market hedging, you just need to use the interest rate of the countries' currencies of the two countries, and also the spot rate today. Okay, here's another practice for you. So Boeing company imported something from the British, and now it's facing a 5 million pounds payable in 1 year. Okay, so why Boeing is always dealing with the exchange risk instead of the British. So right here, still, if you do a money market hedging, you have to deal with U.S. interest, U.K. interest, and the spot exchange rate. Okay, so first question you need to know that if Boeing is dealing with accounts payable in foreign exchange, so should Boeing borrow or lend in foreign currencies? So the answer should be Boeing. Well, to get the answers, you should know that Boeing will need to pay 5 million pounds in 1 year. So Boeing will need to have 5 million pounds so it can pay the British that 5 million pound bill. So how could Boeing have 5 million pounds if Boeing borrow pound today? If Boeing borrow money today, then it will pay pounds in the future. Then it would be they would need to buy more pounds instead of having more pounds. So so Boeing should make a loan. Okay, this time Boeing should be the lender. Well, it needs a loan that will give £5 in 1 year to cover the payable. Does that make sense? So Boeing company should lend a pound loan today. Okay, we will talk how it could lend a pound loan, but Boeing today should lend a pound loan, and this loan will give Boeing 5 million pounds 1 year later, and that 5 million pounds is the principal plus interest of this loan, and this 5 million pounds will be used to pay the bill to fulfill the payable. Okay, so that means Boeing should invest today. Okay, Boeing should invest today. Well, you may want to know how much should Boeing invest today. Well, 5 million pounds is the future value of the loan Boeing invested today. So 5 million divided by 1 plus, this is UK interest rate. You see, this is the pound, so it has to be UK interest. So this would give you roughly a 4.7 million British pound. Okay, so with 4.7 million British pound, how can you get 4.7 million British pound? Well, you will need to get it from the dollar. Well, you will need to equivalent amount of dollars to get you the 4.69 million or 4.7 million pounds. So 4.69 million times 1.8 spot rate now, that would give you 8.45 million US dollars. Okay, so that's how much US dollars do you need to pay to buy that pound, so you can invest that pound in a British bank, and then a year later you would get a 5 million pound. Okay, So that's the dollar cost to get this much of a pound to invest. All right. So how do you get this much of a dollar? You don't want any cash flows today at the end of today. If you have a pound inflow, you want to have pound outflow. If you have a dollar outflow, you want to have dollar inflow. So the dollar you spend to buy the pounds here has to be borrowed from somewhere, and this is borrowed from a U.S. Facility. So you borrow this 8.45 million US dollar today, and then definitely you will need to pay it back, principal plus interest, and the interest rate here is 6%. So what you need to do in the future is that you will need to pay 8.957747 million dollars to the U.S. bank from whomever you borrow the dollar from, and that's how you pay the bill of the engine you imported from Rolls-Royce. Okay, so if you look at your story, if you look at your story setup, okay, so you are looking at 5 million payables due in 1 year. Okay, so that British pound has to be paid off, and you will need to convert equivalent amount of dollars for that 5 million pound a year later. If you do that conversion a year later, then you are exposed to the risk, because today you don't know for sure what the exchange rate is going to be a year later. So you want to avoid that risk. And this money market would provide the hedging tool for you. Okay, so today you just need to borrow US dollars and use the US dollar you borrow to convert to British pound, and then invest the British pound in UK today, and then that British loan you invest can earn you interest, which will add up to 5 million pounds a year later, and you're gonna use that 5 million pounds, your proceeds from the British loan, to pay your bill to Rolls-Royce. And today, on the other side of the story, you borrowed equivalent amount of US dollars, and this will require you to pay interest that you know how much your dollar would be a year later. Okay, so that's the whole point. Today, you know how much dollar you will need to pay to the bank for the principal and the interest you borrowed. Okay, so that number comes with a certainty. Okay, how much US dollar you would get a year, you will need to pay a year later through money market. That number comes with a certainty, and there's no risk. So the hedging has been served.